This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
If we're severely deprived of our basic needs, it snaps us into a particular worldview. So,
well,
for instance,
can I ask you a question?
Yeah, yes.
When I was reading your book, obviously I was reading it while under lockdown here in New York City, and it struck me that this is probably one of the greatest times of uncertainty in history, really, for the entire globe. I mean, 9/11, there was uncertainty. The financial crisis, there was uncertainty. But this event has proven to be larger than those events in many ways. And you see people regress, like people fighting on the floor of Whole Foods for the last roll of toilet paper. And by the way, I'm not making fun of them. I just feel like what's happened is that the uncertainty has removed layers of this hierarchy of needs. So we're kind of even struggling now with the basic layer, and so it's kind of reversed our direction towards self-actualization and so on. Like, the great thing about your book is it's very practical in terms of achieving these higher goals. So now we start to get into your notions of transcendence and, so happy to have my good friend, but also an incredibly smart person. We're going to be talking about his new book that is really exciting for various reasons I'll state in a second. But welcome, Scott Barry Kaufman, psychologist. You've taught at University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, NYU. You've taught courses on happiness, well-being, psychology. You write for Scientific American. You have a podcast called The Psychology Podcast. But what we're really here to talk about is your reformulation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to be much more, in my view, much more interesting, much more practical, and much more useful for my own personal growth, which is all I care about. So your new book is called Transcend, because that's the top of, you don't really call it a reformulation of hierarchies, but that's kind of the top of your hierarchy. But welcome to the podcast, Scott.
Yes, thank you so much, James. So excited to be on here finally. I think it's the first time I've been on your podcast, right?
Yes. So welcome, and hopefully it's the first of many. So, Scott,
that'd be nice.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna introduce your book a little bit, but basically, you looked at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is starts off with physical needs like food and shelter, and then goes up to the other needs. I forget, the next one's like social needs and things like that. Maybe describe Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Well, sure, yeah. So Maslow's original formulation had in a hierarchy of prepotency is what he called it. He didn't call it like a pyramid because he never actually depicted it as a pyramid. There was other people who try to depict it.
Right. So I always see it as like a picture. If you Google it, image it, it's only a pyramid.
And it's not. He never did. He never saw it in that way, like these lockstep things. But he did say that we have physical needs, like food, shelter, water, and then and that's like at the most base of all our needs, important in order for any other needs to be fulfilled. Because if you're chronically hungry, you're not going to be too concerned with composing a symphony, for instance. But then also he had the safety needs, which has more to do with how stable is your environment and how predictable is your environment, because our brain, we are prediction machines, so that's a really important need. And then he had connection and belonging, or he called it belonging. He actually combined belonging with love, but I separated it out in my revised hierarchy of needs. And then he also, above that, had esteem, so esteem from others, as well as esteem for ourselves. But as we know, the two are very strongly connected to each other. And then he had self-actualization, being all that one can be, being their full powers. That was his original model, his original theory of motivation. Yeah.
And the idea is basically that humans for a long time were just cared about these physical needs, and then as they moved up this hierarchy, they started to, as we got more comfortable as a species, that we were able to breathe, we were able to get food, we were able to build communities, and we were a little safer. We were a little safer. We started to focus on things like friendship, family, other organizational structures. And then as our quote unquote tribe got bigger, so it wasn't just 30 people, it was entire civilizations. We started to focus on self-esteem, confidence, achievement, and then finally self-actualization, which he writes a lot about. It's sort of a hard phrase to describe, which you point out, and that's kind of the genesis of your book. But it's this ability to be, creative, moral, somehow be a little bit more self-aware, so you could pursue real personal growth. But I think the discussion is a lot more complicated and a lot more nuanced. And I feel your book, Transcend, is really about much more in depth about how to get the techniques, the methods, the philosophy behind self-actualization, how you can even go beyond it. And you refer to states of flow or mystical states or different types of moral states where maybe describe the difference between transcendence and self-actualization in Maslow's terms.
Yeah, so towards the latter end of his life, he felt as though there was a higher motivation that people can have. I mean, each one of these needs, it's important to emphasize that they're really just worldviews. And if we're severely deprived of our basic needs, it snaps us into a particular worldview. So, for instance,
can I ask you?
Yeah,
can I ask you a question? And I'm sorry, I'm interrupting too much. I want to. But when I was reading your book, obviously I was reading it while under lockdown here in New York City, and it struck me that this is probably one of the greatest times of uncertainty in history, really, for the entire globe. I mean, 9/11, there was uncertainty. The financial crisis, there was uncertainty. But this event has proven to be larger than those events in many ways. And you see people regress, like people fighting on the floor of Whole Foods for the last roll of toilet paper. And by the way, I'm not making fun of them. I just feel like what's happened is that the uncertainty has removed layers of this hierarchy of needs. So we're kind of even struggling now with the basic layer, and so it's kind of reversed our direction towards self-actualization and so on.
Please allow me to comment on that for a second.
Of course.
So it's a great point. Yeah, it's a really great point. And I think it's important to point out that even before this crisis, there were large swaths of Americans that live under that level of uncertainty on a daily basis. And, I have a whole chapter about this, and I have a section in the chapter on safety about extreme uncertainty. There are people who grow up in such impoverished conditions or where there's a lot of violence in the neighborhood. Anytime they step outside of their house, they're at a greater probability than most other Americans in terms of whether or not they'd be shot or something to happen to them. And they've had to deal with this kind of level of uncertainty their whole lives. So I just want to point out for a second that we've already seen the experiment of what happens under those conditions. And psychologists have documented that and shown that when any of us, and this is a point I wanted to make in my book about how any one of us, when we are severely deprived of any of these needs, we all look the same. I really hope that the common humanity shines through in this book that I wrote. That this is not a book about about in-groups and only certain types of in-groups or other in-groups or I don't get into race issues or these I try to show that at the end of the day, we can all rally around some fundamental basic needs that when any one of us are severely deprived of them, we would act the same way.
Well, let me ask you about that. Yeah. But a lot of people who kind of grew up in, let's say, impoverished neighborhoods or on the fringes of society in terms of the poverty line or in other parts of the world that are less developed, would you say there's a difference between what? They don't necessarily live under uncertainty. They just struggle to have their basic physical needs met, but they're kind of certain of that, which is different than I feel what's happening now, where an entire hundreds of millions of people have been stripped of things that they felt certain about that now have become uncertain. So I wonder if there's a little more craziness when the level of certainty versus uncertainty moves.
Well, I'm referring to certainty of survival. And I think that it's fair to say that there's plenty of people based on their environmental conditions in America have had to deal their whole lives with the uncertainty of their mortality. and you do see that in those under those conditions, people tend to focus more on the present. They tend to be more interested in like reproduction is interesting. You see earlier age of reproduction in certain environments. You tend to see a certain cluster of things. You tend to see aggression and anxiety. Now I'm certainly not speaking about everyone in those environments. There's huge differences, but variation even within the conditions. But you do tend to these experiments have natural experiments have been done on people who didn't ask to be in certain environments, and you tend to see tend to see certain things. So I do think we're seeing similar things in a large scale way in America. A lot of people who have never have taken for granted their certainty, we should say, and what they're doing under such conditions is they're being pitched into this state of psychological entropy, which is a technical term that psychologists use to define this state of complete uncertainty. Like we're all cybernetic systems. We can really get nerdy about this at a very detailed level, but I know you probably like to keep your podcast at a level that will appeal to the most people, most listeners.
I mean, I think by the end of this conversation, I know we're going to get to, like, the great thing about your book is it's very practical in terms of achieving these higher goals and what it means to achieve these higher states of transcendence and what methods we can use and what challenges there are. So we're going to get there. There's all these specific exercises you give, which Maslow never really did. For me, studying Maslow, when I was in college or whatever, I was always uncertain what self-actualization was, and I think you explained it very well. But then you got into this practical level about what you call transcendence, which you got very practical, which I appreciate.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can't wait to get to that discussion as well. Discussing both this deep insecurity and what that does to humans is just as important as discussing our higher possibilities. I tried not to neglect one or the other in the book. I try to talk about how we can integrate these things in our daily lives.
Yeah, and you had this great quote from John Paulus, which I highlighted, and I'm trying to find it, but he had a great quote about uncertainty.
The mathematician, the only certainty we have is uncertainty, or something like that.
Yeah, uncertainty is the only certainty there is, and knowing how to live with insecurity is the only security. And that quote, I'll say it again, uncertainty is the only certainty there is, and knowing how to live with insecurity is the only security. That quote, more than anything, applies to this situation right now, but in general, it applies to, of course, everyday life. We never really know anything. We just can make lots of assumptions. But I think it's a very beautiful thing to practice living with uncertainty.
Absolutely. Well, we're learning this skill right now, aren't we?
Yes.
A lot of us out of necessity, out of immediate necessity. And there's also going to be this there's certainly this. Some people are arguing there's we're shooting exponentially towards danger of the zone, and maybe you would challenge that. We talked a little bit about this beforehand, but also you're seeing this psychologically as well. You're seeing an exponential shooting up of psychological entropy, is what I would argue. I mean, we can get really technical about this. I could probably draw graphs and stuff, but that's not being talked about as much.
Right, but define that. So entropy is sort of like this state where things move from order to chaos.
Yes, but that happens, correct, but that happens in other physical systems. It's been described how other thermodynamic systems work, but it also applies to human beings. We're whole systems. Our body and mind are so connected to each other to the extent to which we have so much anxiety in our overall system. It pitches us into this state where lots of other systems shut down. We narrow our attention. We maybe even start acting irrationally. Like we go and we buy and hoard as much toilet paper as possible, I think is one outcome of psychological entropy. This is something psychologists should study in this moment. This is a great time for psychologists to study humans, and it's understandable.
It is a great moment.
Yeah, it's understandable why we would act this way en masse, but I also think it's important to recognize that we also have the capacity to override some of these things, and I think that's why mindfulness, meditation is really important right now. Super duper important.
Many of the exercises actually that you talk about in your book are applicable right now. But it's interesting because so you write in your book pretty early on how Maslow kind of broke down the needs into two groups. One is deficiency and one is growth. And I think in general, a lot of people in at least American society tend to focus on growth. Like they focus on their careers, their family, how to be more successful, how to achieve that esteem, how to achieve that self-actualization. But now suddenly everybody's been kind of reversed back into deficiency. So everybody got afraid, oh my gosh, I'm going to run out of toilet paper or I'm going to run out of hand sanitizer. And so they just, without the self-actualization parts, they kind of just went into this lack mode, which drove people, which created this, what you call entropy, but just created this kind of insanity.
No doubt about it. We are in deficiency realm of human existence right now. Maslow distinguished between the deficiency realm and the being realm, or the growth realm of human existence as well. And there is no doubt that we're pitched into this deficiency realm, not just in terms of our survival, but in terms of our connections, as well as our and you may see this even more if the economy doesn't work out, but you'll see actually esteem. We don't like to admit it. We like to think, oh, we're above the need for esteem from others, pride for the work we do and the respect we do. But if we're out of a job and we have don't have opportunities to do things to make us feel like we're valuable, or have some sort of what psychologists call self-competency or mastery, that's going to be even further contributing to our deficiency state.
Well, and you describe later on in the book, you describe self-esteem as having two components: self-worth and mastery. But
you read my book. Thank you.
Of course, I read your book.
No, I just want to say I really appreciate it. Not all interviewers really do. Do you know what I mean? So thank you.
No. Well, first off, by the way, I will say, and it's going to sound odd on a book like this, but it's a page turner because you kind of follow Maslow's careers while you're describing all these different theories about what we need and how we can grow and how we can get self-actualize or transcend. And but it's also a really good history of all the different psychological theories over the past 100 years. And I want to ask you about that in a second. But you again, you describe there's two components of self-esteem: self-worth and mastery. But you also imply that as opposed to the pop psychology self-esteem books that became popular, really from the 70s or 60s until now, that it might not be the case of just sort of repeating, I'm a good person, I'm the best, that basically self-worth and self-esteem is inextricably linked to mastery and rather than vice versa. Like you get competent at something and then you feel good about yourself because other people validate that you got good at something. So you can't just sort of like, mantra your way to self-esteem, it feels, or in general, that's not the direction that it works.
Yeah, you nailed it. Ultimately, at this moment, we need to practice our transcendence. And this is where I assume we're getting at in this conversation. This might be a good lesson for a lot of us during this time. And me too, by the way. It's not like I'm standing here like some guru, being like, I'm above all this. And I'm just, look at these humans. I just want to be very clear. I'm a freaking train wreck as well. So look.
No, we all are right now. And I think it's silly not to admit that. Like even I just did an Instagram live where I was asking everybody, what's your anxiety level now versus, where it was before this started. Everybody was basically kind of honest about 50%. And that's probably the same for me as well. Meaning I'm more anxious, or I'm 50% less calm now than I was a few weeks ago.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that this will flatten the curve of psychological entropy eventually and pretty soon. And what I mean by that, and that's something that's not being discussed, like what I just said is not like something you'll hear, but I think if we should work on flattening the curve of psychological entropy as much as we should work on flattening the curve of the actual virus spread. But the thing is, if we can flatten that curve, what we'll realize is that for any moment of panic, there's just a natural ending point. Our system can't handle that much. So there will be a certain point where we actually start to just not even give a F anymore. Like there will be a point, if this goes on so long, that we'll look at the news and actually start to be desensitized to yet another, call for panic. We'll be like, you know what, like I've gone 2 months with this. I'm just not even going to care anymore, and I think we may see that at a certain point.
Well, and I wonder if in some cases, because we're dealing with the base needs instead of these growth needs, if there's some positive elements of that, in that, for instance, I actually find that I'm thinking less about what people think of me now than I did a few weeks ago.
Oh my gosh, me too.
Yeah, because and in fact, what I realized, it was very interesting, is that I actually feel like I really don't like a lot of people I thought I liked.
Mm-hmm.
Like I see,
I'm going through the same thing, James. I'm going through the same thing.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. So what's going on there? Like that seems like almost reverse the hierarchy of needs.
No, it is, because it's pitching us into this state where we're focused so narrowly on the essentials, and those essentials may not just be survival essentials. They may actually be like essentials of meaning. Like we may be focused on our meaning essentials right now to a degree that we never have before. So we start to realize, well, look how much of my life I've wasted over caring about what assholes think of me. And that's a realization I had, by the way. This is not just some abstract thing. Did you happen to see a tweet I wrote a couple days ago where I said, I'm done? It went viral because I think so many people relate to this. I said, yeah, you should look it up and read it out loud. Yeah, read it out loud.
Okay, hold on. We're getting there. Nice picture of your book in the tweets. Okay, this pandemic has made me realize that I just don't have time to please everyone anymore. I'm done. Trolls, goodbye. Assholes, goodbye. Hardcore cynics, goodbye. Whatever time I have left, this is the new SBK. Only good faith humans are worth my time. And that is so true. And the thing is, here's the thing. That's what someone on the esteem level of the hierarchy of needs would also say. But it seems like we're also forced to say it when we no longer are trying to get esteem because we don't care anymore.
That's exactly right. That's such a great astute point you made, and only a fellow Carnegie Mellon graduate would have made such an astute point.
Well, I was thrown out of Carnegie Mellon.
Only a Carnegie Mellon reject.
One time,
yeah. Okay. Well, no, but no, it's a really good point, and that tweet it genuinely didn't come from a place of ego, as far as I could tell, in terms of the spirit of what I was feeling in that moment. I'll tell you what I was feeling. I had a weighted blanket. If you read the tweet right before it, you'll see the genesis of that. I had a weighted blanket that I was suffocating from.
Oh yeah. By the way, when I read the main tweet first, and then I read that one, the weighted blanket one, and I thought you were being metaphorical.
No. I literally
this weighted blanket is suffocating me. I thought you were talking about this crisis.
No. I actually tried one of these weighted blankets because they advertise they'll cure my autism, my ADHD, my anxiety disorder, my OCD, my schizophrenia, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try it. And I'm literally, you gotta imagine the state of my mind as I was writing that the tweet that did go viral. The viral for me. You know what I mean by viral? Yeah. So not Justin Bieber level viral, but my level of viral. But anyway, I had this blanket on me. And I wrote that, and I had I had some trolls responding to it, and I just thought to myself, you know what, like I really don't have time for this. Like I may be suffocating right now. Like I just care about people that we have. There's a mutual caring about, and that's it.
Yeah, and people. So I'm looking at the trolls and their responses. By the way, people are just idiots in general, and it's not a surprise. And by the way, I don't hate people for doing this because they're all dealing with their own thing. But like the first comment here is, you won't be suffering from any disorders if you suffocate to death.
Yeah, exactly.
Duh. Like first off, that's the most obvious statement in the world. Like, yes, that's a true statement. You won't be X if you die, and that's just always true. Second, that's the main response everybody has to everything. Like, oh, I hate filling out this Excel spreadsheet for work. Oh, well, you won't be filling out Excel spreadsheets if you die. Like, all right,
Exactly.
everybody, just relax on reminding everybody that this virus causes death. Like,
But
it's not like
but
you
not only
forgot
that,
it.
you're exactly right. But then someone wrote something like, "Well, that's guilt that's getting to me," or whatever. And I'm like, "What the like?" What? And then so I went through this whole like series of exchanges where I was like, "What do you mean guilt? Like, no, it's actually it's proper anxiety I'm experiencing. Like, don't be like." Trying to like say it's something else. And then he ended up saying, "Oh, I didn't mean guilt. I meant quilt." So after all that, it actually turned out maybe that he didn't even mean guilt. And after all, he wrote quilt.
Oh
Anyway.
my God, that is so funny because they really did sound annoying. Like after this person says that's guilt, and you said guilt about what, and then this person says, "You tell me what's on your mind."
That
is
triggered
so
me.
arrogant.
That triggered me. Do you see what you agree with me? You agree with me? That was like that would
my
trigger you
God.
too, right? That would trigger you too.
I would be. I'd probably block them actually after
Thank
that.
you. You know what? I just want to say this is so like relieving to just have this conversation with you right now, and you like validate my frustration. But then after all that, he eventually like 2 hours later, he comes back on. He's like, "Actually, I meant quilt." I'm like, "What?"
That's crazy. It must have just reformatted. So
Quilty,
yeah, it seems
quilty, yeah.
But so it seems like whichever direction you're going in, like if you're going up the growth hierarchy, now you need esteem, and then you worry about what people think, and then hopefully if you get self-actualized, you stop worrying about what people think. But the flip side is, if you're just trying to survive and understand a very complex, uncertain situation that's very scary, you also stop caring what people think. So so it makes the theory of needs a little confusing. Like, did I somehow achieve something by reducing?
Yeah, well, I think that it's important to recognize that the goal is not to go from human to not human. So the goal here is not to ever get to a state where you're like, you don't care at all what people think about you. I mean, we're social animals. At the end, even the most enlightened person still remains a social animal, unless they've somehow managed to be transhuman, like trans, at a higher level of trans.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, okay, so and so I think it's important to have a certain also, and we can get to this kind of transcendent worldview and what that means. But part of the transcendent worldview is having a sense of like cosmic humor as well, like being able to also stand above yourself and laugh at yourself as well in your own. That's a meta level of humor. Do you know what I mean? And you're really good at that too, by the way. I've seen your stand-up bits.
Yeah, and because the thing is, what you realize in stand-up is that, or in general with anything, is that there's usually other ways to look at things, and sometimes there's very unusual ways to look at things, and that are not common. Like we're all sort of programmed by society to kind of all fit in together and have a standard vocabulary of describing experiences and feeling experiences. And I think humor sort of looks at alternative ways that are maybe a little bit more tension inducing, and then it breaks the tension. This is just like maybe one bad theory of humor, like all theories of humor, but it's you do have to kind of have. But this reminds me of, and you discuss later, the differences between the different types of self-actualization or transcendence, ranging from kind of external success in the world based on achieving all these different states of mind. But there's also kind of this Eastern way of looking at things, and I was going to ask you about this, when you feel less attached to things in the world, and that's also kind of a meaning of transcendence. And so I was curious how you would rationalize these things.
It is. No, it absolutely is. I talk a lot in the last chapter about what is the worldview of transcendence that Maslow was trying to get at, but that really was co-opted from a lot of Eastern philosophy, of Eastern views of self-actualization itself, self-realization. And I think you have to realize that at this highest level of transcendence, there's such a great integration where integration within you and then with you in the world, that a lot of things that are you've taken for granted as dichotomies in your life actually turn out, you don't see them as dichotomies at all. You kind of see everything as part of this overall unity or whole. Now, look, I know that all sounds really, woo-woo, what I just said, but I think that we can, if we really unpack that, we can really start to understand what wisdom is. And it really is not having attachments to and what does not having attachments mean? Well, none of this is attached to no one part of you becomes the whole of you. I think that's one part of it that's really important.
So a specific example might be if you're, let's say you have a job that has a hierarchy. There's like assistants, and then associates, and then managers, and then directors, and then VPs, and then so on. So there's a hierarchy. You might attach your identity to where you are on that hierarchy, as an example.
Well, that's definitely one part of it in terms of a hierarchy of rank.
Right.
And that's certainly, you do transcend at that high level. You do transcend the need to compare yourself and your whole self-worth relative to one part of you and where that ranks to others.
Which is very hard and that's why this self-actualization is very difficult to achieve. Like, I think very few people are able to do that. We're tribal animals, so we're always there's always going to be this primitive need to rank ourselves in a hierarchy.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the tribalism part, because I talk about that a great depth in the connection chapter, is the need for connection. And what I try to do is separate the need for connection, which is a lower need, to the need for love, or what Maslow called love for the being of others, which is a higher, more transcendent need. And I think we can, to a large degree, transcend our tribal impulses. I think we can transcend any of these lower order impulses. But it's harder work. It's easier. The path of least resistance is just walking around, letting your most deep-seated evolutionary drives drive you. That's easy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I could eat chocolate all day long. Trust me.
But we all kind of know if you did that, it probably wouldn't have a good outcome. Because then I mean, like, for instance, even like if we all walked around trying to find sex all day long, that creates its own set of problems in living in a functioning society as well. And
you see examples of people in the media who've tried that, and that doesn't end well for them usually.
Right. So I guess we could start getting into the kind of the specifics of how you kind of move beyond all these different states, or even in a situation like now where we feel ourselves being pulled back from the needs that were, or where we are in the hierarchy of needs that we're accustomed to. Things have been stripped from our daily life experience. Understanding kind of these principles of self-actualization, and then what you call transcendence, is very helpful. And I really like how you describe having a sense. Like one of the first, I'll call it a technique. I don't think you do that, but one of the first techniques is having a strong sense of possibility and a strong desire to explore.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the need for exploration, because that's a need that wasn't explicitly stated in Maslow's original hierarchy of needs. He had a thing called cognitive needs, cognitive and aesthetic needs, which are a part of the need for exploration. But the need for exploration is, as I see it, a more overarching need that we do share with other animals, but takes a unique form in humans that causes us to go toward the uncertain. There's so many of us are not even aware of that option. We think
Right.
The only option when there's uncertainty is to fear it. But there are these humans, there are individual differences. There are great individual differences in that. And I've been studying most of my career, 20 years, I've been studying this trait called openness to experience. And people differ on this personality trait, but those who score high in openness to experience get excited by uncertainty. It like tickles their dopaminergic synapse, so to speak. I'm such a nerd.
Yeah, and I think you kind of describe this more in the exercises you give later, but I think you call them the B exercises. But
that's right. Maslow called them that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you divide cognitive exploration into two things: an openness to experience and intellect. And these are things that maybe separate a little bit humans from animals. So, for instance, somebody who's never played golf before could decide, oh, okay, I'm gonna try golf this weekend, and I'm gonna figure it out. So that's openness to experience. And then they'll watch other people. They'll start to get better. They'll use their intellect to get better. And I think this openness to experience is very important, because for me, the way I understand it is, you start to diversify your hierarchies. If all you do is go to work, you're going to put yourself in that hierarchy of like, oh, am I a manager or am I a VP? And how do I compare myself? But if on the weekends you do something else, or at night you do something else, and you diversify the different hierarchies you're ranking yourselves in, then you won't feel as down if one hierarchy is not feeling as good for you that day.
Oh gosh, I love that. I agree. Is that how you live your life? Because I actually try to live my life like that as well.
Absolutely, because I used to, day trade. This is like almost 20 years ago. I used to day trade, and I knew that if my day had not gone well, that I was just going to be miserable and not be able to sleep. So I would consciously dive deep into something else that I felt I could perform well in. Like, for instance, I would go online and play chess, for instance, or I would, take a long walk or something like that. But it has to be something you're really interested in. You can only explore things that you either already love doing or that you could potentially love. So there's the exploration part. If I explore something and if I'm not really getting feedback pretty quickly that, oh, this is great, then it's over for me. I have to go to something else.
Yeah, and I think you see that it's very common among high creative individuals. Not necessarily talking about high achievers, but just people who live a creative life.
I'm definitely not a high
general.
achiever, but I am a dilettante in lots of things.
I'd say you are.
I don't know.
But the whole thing about achievement, see, at the higher level of consciousness, at this transcendent level, or what I call healthy transcendence, which I distinguish from unhealthy transcendence, because you see a lot of unhealthy transcendence in the world today. But at a level of healthy transcendence, even words like achievement don't have meaning anymore. Like, lots of words lose meaning at that level of consciousness. Like, even selfishness loses meaning, because what does that mean anymore? Like, what you love doing is benefiting the world. So how is, what meaning does that have anymore? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you refer to this. There's a quote. I think it's you quoted somebody else, but where you say, the direction is more important than the destination. I forgot who said that.
Carl Rogers.
Yeah, and so I thought that was very insightful. I mean, obviously, Carl Rogers said it. You repeated it, and now I'm saying it's insightful, which is sort of an after. That doesn't really matter, but I think that's what you're saying, is that the achievement doesn't, like it. Let's say I want to get better at golf. It's not like I'm going to stop when I hit a certain handicap level or whatever. It's just the direction itself. Like, the process of improvement is really the key thing there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you just said it so well.
And so, okay, so again, in terms of getting enough steam to not care what people think, obviously mastery is important, and part of mastery is being open to possibility and then using your intellect to sort of master the possibilities that sort of resonate with you. Like, how would you say one finds the things? I mean, you talk a lot about purpose later on in the book, which is related to this. How do people find the things that really kind of give them a sense of purpose?
I tend to take a Viktor Frankl approach to this. And he was very clear that you don't find your calling finds you. And okay, that sounds good. And people are like, well, what does that actually mean? Well, I think it means that we don't have to worry so much about finding our one true purpose. I think that right now, in this climate we're in with the coronavirus, I think this is the time, folks. You have a purpose. I'm giving it to you. If you didn't ever think you had a purpose before this time, you can literally go volunteer for some shelter and help people, and that's a good enough purpose. But you know what? Even being conscious of the fact that so like Viktor Frankl says in the book, and you quote him in some ways. So his book is Man's Search for Meaning. It's a great book. Obviously, Viktor Frankl was in Auschwitz. His family was killed, and every day he managed to survive by finding meaning in his life. And you quote him here. He said, in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. And so for him, he had, in his book, he had two ways of deriving meaning in his life. One is the hope that he would eventually see his wife alive again, which unfortunately he never did. And then he had a sense of meaning in that he wanted to write about these psychological discoveries he was making while a prisoner in this concentration camp. And so
but just being aware that he needed meaning in his life enabled him to survive. And I think that's a healthy thing to be aware of.
Very, very much so. I mean, he argued that the will to meaning is just as fundamental and as the will to power or the will to love. That we need that too in our lives.
So let's say someone's listening to this, and there's so many different directions we could talk about, but this sense of finding some meaning. Again, you made a good point. It's not just one. Nobody has just one man-made purpose that they were put on this earth to do. You could have many purposes, purposi, and that's the whole idea of this cognitive exploration, is always being open to this sense of possibility, always exploring new things where your interests and your heart take you. But what are some methods for you? Like, what do you feel your sense of purpose is right now? How do you find meaning in your life?
I try to uplift people as much as I can and show them that even under, I guess I'm going to start sounding like I'm channeling Viktor Frankl all of a sudden, but I think that a big part of my motivation is I want to show even under the most seemingly dire of circumstances, we can still create joy and meaning and transcendence in our lives, probably more than people realize.
So, like for you right now, for instance, what has given you meaning and a sense of purpose? Obviously, this book coming out has given you meaning and a sense of purpose.
Yeah, that's a big one. The book is a big one for me. As silly as this may sound, I've found using my Twitter platform has given me a sense of purpose as well, because it's an outlet for me to keep spreading that positivity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's part of the whole kind of social needs as well, that even though it doesn't feel, and people make fun of it, oh, you're not really talking to people, you're not face to face with them, but it's still, you are getting kind of validation from the community when you're, or from individuals when you're interacting with them on what used to be called social networking and is now unfortunately called social media. But I think using it as a social network has power in terms of satisfying those social needs and also maybe providing meaning.
That's exactly right. Another thing that provides meaning, it dawned on me, is I really like truth seeking, and so I write this column at Scientific American. I like to get at the real essence of things and synthesize them and synthesize multiple perspectives. I think that my science writing can offer some value, I hope.
Yeah. Well, like, what's the last topic you wrote about?
Probably about caregiving and caregiving professions. Why are there not more men in caregiving professions? And how, if we had more men, and we focus so much on women, in male-dominated fields. Well, what happened if we cared about everyone, who's underrepresented in their fields, and how that would rise the tide for everyone, for instance?
So, in the book, you talk about, when you start to talk about self-actualization, you talk about 4 qualities that, sort of this, you mentioned this term, be loving, this higher level of love based on, appreciating the beingness of others. And you talk about 4 qualities of what you call the quiet ego: detached awareness, inclusive identity, perspective taking, the ability to take on more than one perspective, which I think is really key, and growth mindedness. So the perspective taking, I think, is really interesting. I'm curious what you think of this. I just read this quote the other day. I was reading a book by Charlie Munger. It's Poor Charlie's Almanac. It's just a book of his speeches and stuff. And he says that you shouldn't state an opinion or even have an opinion, really. And this is his own view, but it's a very interesting perspective. You shouldn't have an opinion unless you can argue for the other side even better than the people who are on the other side, which I think is very interesting.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I really do love that. I try to do that. I really try to do that in from a scientific perspective. We're always trying to falsify our hypothesis. It's like the exact opposite of what people in the real world do. Who are non-scientists. They're everything they do is to confirm their preconceived idea, but we actually try. If we can't falsify it, then that suggests that it might actually be true. So that's actually that's like exciting to scientists if we do everything we can to try to falsify it and we can't, like that.
But it's very important, like even in entrepreneurship or investing, if you start a business, I call this the smoking crack bias, which is that most people I know who start businesses, they think their business is amazing. It's like the best business ever. And just simply being on the outside, you could very easily see, oh, this guy is smoking crack or not. And whenever I start a new business or a new venture or adventure, I always have to ask myself, am I smoking crack? What are all the things that can go wrong? And how do I deal with that? And then also it's important just even for things like this, trying to understand what's going on with this coronavirus, like what happened, there's all these different policy decisions they're making, like should you do herd immunity? Should you do full lockdown quarantining? And if you have an opinion in this totally very new complex environment, it's very important to be able to at least argue the other side to see if you're making sense or not.
Well, I agree. I think that's a key element of intelligence, in fact.
Yeah, and on the growth mindedness, you have a very interesting quote, which is turning down the dial on one's ego also allows for a mindset of personal growth. So describe that to me. So I'm dialing down my ego. How does that translate into a mindset of personal growth?
There seems to be this paradoxical relationship between our ego and growth. We can tie ego to our defenses. So some people might define ego in different ways. I just view it as all the defenses that you have within yourself that tries to protect some positive image of yourself. So it's like all the things that is incessantly interested in seeing ourselves in a positive light. But if we can, that's how I define it. And in defining it that way, you see this paradoxical relationship. Well, if you can turn the volume down on that and get outside of yourself in that way and look at all the things that actually lead to your growth, then you can transcend just being in the boat of, like, if we want to use a sailboat metaphor, you can secure your boat and you can make the boat look as really, really nice and pretty. You can put aesthetics all over the boat. You could paint it really nice. But until you open that sail, you're never actually going to move anywhere. You know what I mean?
Well, it's interesting because the way you just defined ego was very interesting, which was almost this very sad view of people with a lot of ego as opposed to a healthy ego. So, like, let's say someone is tied to this identity. I'm really well educated. I have a lot of money. I have these achievements. And then let's say, I don't know, they go broke. I mean, this has happened to me, is that you've been holding up this identity and using all your energy to hold up this identity. It gets kind of scary when you lose that, and you have to be comfortable with that. You have to actually subtract from your ego, so you're not trying to hold up this thing that's no longer possible to hold up, this feature, this part of your identity. And I guess being vulnerable in some sense allows you the freedom to not have to hold up your ego anymore. So that gives you more room for personal growth.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like a lot of the things you're saying tie into recent tweets that I did. So I put one yesterday about how, like, it was quite elucidating to me when I had to suddenly drop my Columbia University identity, which for the time being I've had to drop, and I'm just SBK now, and like, what does that look like? And will people just like SBK just for who I am, my cheeky, quirky, truth-seeking, nerdy self? Like, is that good enough? And being able to confront that, it has been a really valuable lesson for me, as well as, I think, growth oriented. It's contributed to growth.
So this is all related to having a healthy authenticity. And I always wonder about this because people say, oh, just be yourself. Like, you're going into an important meeting, just be yourself.
Terrible.
Yeah. It always seems to me to be terrible advice. So
never works for me.
Because I don't even really know what it means. But what to you, what is authenticity? And what's the difference between healthy authenticity and unhealthy authenticity? You mentioned both types.
I really need to shave. But here's the thing.
I shave. That's the one thing I try to stick to every day. Is I shave every day.
I forgot to. I also need a haircut. I hope. Thank gosh, video is not, going up on this. But look, here's the thing.
You look great.
Oh, stop it. Thanks. Okay, so here's the thing. Everything in life. This is the framework upon which I have been working on with this book and in life in general. Everything by itself is neither good or bad. Everything actually has a B flavor to it and a D flavor to it, a deficiency motivation or a growth motivation to it. Everything. You can view everything in life within this framework. Now, some people, when I've outlined this framework to them, they said that like it completely changed their whole view of everything in life. And this was Maslow's framework, and it changed. It inspired me to write this book and devote 5 years of my life to writing it because I believe in it. So this is a long-winded way of answering your question because I think there's a larger point I wanted to make from this. And yes, it applies to authenticity as well. So authenticity can have a D. So I call it de-authenticity versus B-authenticity, and I explicitly make that distinction in my book. So de-authenticity is the kind of authenticity where you say, well, I'm authentic because I say everything that's on my mind. No, as I say in the book, that just makes you an asshole. Like,
That's like the radical honesty movement is essentially that.
I mean, if someone's like, I don't know, ask your opinion on something, and you tell the truth that's deeply going to hurt your friend's feelings. That's not necessarily like to be pride. Oh, look, I'm just authentic. You're allowed to have sensitivity. So I think B authenticity is a growth-oriented form of authenticity, or I call it healthy authenticity as well, where you are growing and learning as a whole person, and the form of authenticity that you put out in the world is one that's grounded in deep honesty, but it's also an awareness of the relational aspect is important there, because if we can increase our relationships, we're also contributing to our capacity for growth as well. So it's not saying everything that's on your mind. It's actually being quite mindful and conscious of what sides of yourself you're actualizing and you're focusing on at that moment.
But it's hard. Like, you have this healthy authenticity scale, and so you can ask yourself, or does this apply to you? And you have a whole list of things, and like one of them is I have a very good understanding of why I do the things I do. And I could see someone saying, oh, of course, I have a very good understanding of why I do the things I do, without actually having a very good understanding.
That's the problem. Well, that's the problem with self-report.
Yeah, because like, for instance, I could say, I can give again, I'll use coronavirus as an example. I can give very good reasons why the economy should reopen and blah, blah, blah. And there's this data and this data. But maybe I think I'm saying this because this is the facts and this is data, and I'm just trying to express what people don't see. But maybe I'm just scared, and that's why I'm saying that. So it's hard to actually know.
Okay, so this is very true. This is the real problem with self-report and a limitation of putting such a thing in the book. But I think that even just being aware of the importance of being aware is hopefully valuable to people. So some people, it may never have dawned on them that they could be self-deceiving themselves. So even the act of forcing people to think, are you really deceiving yourself, may actually be a valuable act in and of itself. And this may gets philosophical, but
yeah, no, I agree. So being able to, at the very least, being able to be a skeptic of and to be curious, and you refer to the importance of curiosity many times. I think the words exploration and curiosity could be almost interchangeable in the book, and even being curious about your own motives with the understanding that you might not be correct, that in itself is valuable for always determining where you are on the authenticity scale. Because sometimes you might not always realize, oh my gosh, I just realized I was inauthentic about this, but at least you might sometimes realize, or it might move you on the spectrum saying, look, there's part of me that's scared, and that's probably why I have this opinion, but also there's some data here as well. And so at least being curious about the self-reporting, about how you're self-reporting yourself, could expand or broaden the spectrum of your authenticity.
I completely agree.
And so now we start to get into your notions of transcendence, and right. And this is really the goal, is that hopefully we're in a society where a lot of these other needs are met, or at least we have them under or we manage them. And by the way, there's no directions. You can aim for transcendence, and then that will provide you with more food because more people will respond to your message and give you opportunities and so on. So they all kind of work together. But you talk about, you have more of an intrinsic award for experiences you do, I guess, as opposed to external rewards. You talk about having a momentary loss of fears, anxieties, and inhibitions, greater acceptance and forgiveness, heightened awe and surrender. And so let's start to talk now about techniques for getting this.
The practical,
yes,
not just the theoretical, because I'm very good at the theoretical.
No, but you're very good at the practical too, because you have the B exercises. For instance,
I sold myself short just there, so thank you for.
Yes, I'm not going to let you be self-deprecating, because you've got these really great exercises that I'm going to start doing, like and this is what this first one is related to your being open to possibility. You say the first exercise you give is sample things. What do you mean by that? Are we at the buffet table, or what should I sample?
Yeah, this is taken from Maslow's exercises to live more in that B realm of human existence, and I was so excited to be able to put together and piece together lots of things that were just lay there unpublished, had just laid there. Well, sampling things, I think what he probably meant by that is, just jump into things that you might not even know. You just don't know if you're gonna like it. But like it's part of the drive of exploration. I break down exploration in different forms of exploration, and one part of it is social exploration. Sample different people.
Yeah.
Like maybe you've never been friends with a Republican before. Well, become friends with a Republican. Try it out. Sampling doesn't mean, that you're locked in.
Scott, you just lost half my audience.
Yeah, but did I really? Because they don't even want to say.
No, I'm just kidding.
Wait, did I lose the Republicans or the Democrats?
Probably both. That's what happens when you polarize. But no, I hear what you're saying though. Like, it's important to be open to other subcultures that you might be interested in, or so that's kind of social exploration. Or go to I don't go out dancing very much. Maybe go out dancing with your spouse or whoever, or just trying. You have another exercise here, which is fight familiarization and seek fresh experiences, which is kind of a different way of saying the same thing. If you get stuck in a routine, that's kind of a signal that you need to find a fresh experience.
Totally. Maslow came up with the different characteristics of self-actualizing people, and which I've been trying to test. And I actually have the test you can take for free at selfactualizationtests.com. But one of the main components of self-actualization is newness of appreciation. And that means that you see the same things. So it's not quite the same as sampling new things. It's also like being able to appreciate with fresh eyes something that you've seen so many times before. And
how do you
may have
cultivate
become
that?
Stale to others. Well, mindfulness is certainly one way of cultivating it, but directing your attention to different features or aspects of something, or a person, not just a thing, but a person. A lot of people in relationships talk about how passion wanes, and usually that happens when you've taken your partner for granted, as though they're not a being that is constantly in a state of growth themselves. It's like you started to view them more as a thing than a person, and be like, I have this thing. This is a point that Esther Perel makes in her great writings as well. And so it's recognizing that most things are still in a state of growth, and we can appreciate that sacredness of that, but also appreciate different aspects of it. When you look at a flower that maybe you pass every single day, you'll notice an aspect of it that you never noticed before.
And this is related to another exercise. Do not let anyone force roles on you, which I think is very important. And then you give as an example, do not act the way other people think that a doctor, a minister, or a teacher should act. Or like, it was a big realization for me when I realized, oh, I don't have to act like a normal financial, I used to go on CNBC a lot and talk about the economy or stocks or whatever. And I didn't have to act like a normal financial pundit would act. I could just say what I think. And, if I'm punished for it, so be it. But at least I'll be happier, was my thinking at the time.
That's awesome.
And, another thing also related to that is do not conceal your ignorance, admit it. You'll notice pundits on TV never say, I don't know, because they're kind of not, you're not asked back if you say, I don't know. And
is that right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And so, but I think in general, it's such a powerful technique to basically not be afraid to ask questions, even if it makes you look stupid.
Well, I think our president would be even better respected if he said every now and then, look, I don't know, like this is really out of my hands, out of my jurisdiction. I think we would actually have respect for that. Yeah,
I think so. I think I would say I'm trying to think of any president that kind of did that. Who was known for saying I don't know. I don't know. They all have pretty. People very rarely in public admit they don't know the answer to something.
Well, what Rumsfeld was like, we have known unknowns,
right.
unknown knowns that are unknown.
Right, he had that matrix. Is known knowns.
Do you remember that? Remember that?
Yeah. It was a 2x2 in a matrix of there was known knowns, known unknowns. Like for instance, we didn't know if we didn't know if Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. But then there's like unknown unknowns. So we have no idea what other things might happen if we attack Iraq.
Yeah, so I mean, people like to hate on Rumsfeld, but like that was kind of humility.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I don't know if it worked for him or not, but I guess
I don't know.
Yeah. So
listeners are going to listen to me and actually really think I'm a Republican now.
Rumsfeld, what? Do you want to go to war? So now I'm on this path. I buy into this aspect that transcendence is a good thing, and maybe you could even describe more like what it is, what that direction looks like. But what other things would you recommend? Like for me, if I want to be on the path to, being my most potential self, what should I do?
Yeah, wisdom really does require not thinking of things as false dichotomies. Even if people force false dichotomies on us, being able to say, you know what, I think that these things are not pitted against each other necessarily, like selfishness versus altruism. Okay, no, I don't think that's...
Democrat versus Republican.
Democrat, Republican, definitely. Even like things like male, female, like you're allowed to have a combination of both these kinds of qualities. You're allowed to be... okay, so we could actually go right down the line. Evil versus good. That's a big one. We tend to think like, oh, those are the narcissists and we're not the narcissists. Well, a big part of transcendent thinking is to realize, well, we have these potentialities within us as well, and there isn't such a fine demarcation between your neighbor and you. And there's so many of these kinds of things. It's called dichotomy transcendence is a way of thinking about this. But also seeking out fresh experiences. Well, we already talked about that. Also being able to not hitch your identity to yourself. So if your identity changes, you don't fall apart. Your existence doesn't fall apart, is what I mean. So suddenly you don't feel like you're existenceless.
Right. So you have towards the end of the book, you have 7 principles for becoming a whole person, and the first principle is accept your whole self, not just your best self. So it's kind of like when your identity starts to have cracks in it or starts to fall apart, you still need to be able to say, well, look, I'm still me. It's just people don't see what I perceive to be the best version of me, but I have to be good with this.
Yeah, totally. And I'm really glad you even read the appendices. I put a lot of work into those principles, and it was like a chapter 1 sort of thing. And then we had, because the book got too big, so they're like, yeah, let's sneak it into the appendix. So thank you for reading that.
Oh no, I actually wish you hadn't. I mean, it's kind of the main sort of prescriptive part of the book. It's in the appendix.
I know.
But that's okay. It's still there.
Both of the appendices are the most prescriptive, and then the rest of it's kind of like science theory and stories and stuff.
Good stories.
Yeah. So the idea of accepting your whole self, this is what I've really grappled with, and I've just become convinced is just essential to becoming a whole person, because we can just, our brain is designed to just focus on very specific aspects of ourself, and it tends to be the aspects of ourself that we like the best about ourselves. So people tend to associate moral things with their true self, and they disavow the rest. all the naughty bad bits, they're like, that's not my true self. And I think that is not good for growth to think like that. Well, it's all you.
Right. So you suggest in this section, you say you should ask yourself, which potentialities within me do I most wish to spend my limited time cultivating, developing, and actualizing in this world? And so the question is, how do you answer that? How do you get the self-awareness to answer that question? Because a lot of people will just say, oh, I need my potential for money to that's what I want to work on. But that we know money doesn't necessarily lead to anything. I mean, it does lead to some. You can't, obviously having some money is good in our society, but it doesn't satisfy all of our needs, particularly if we have other issues. So how do you get the self-awareness to answer this question about what is potentially inside of me that I should explore?
Well, psychologists have distinguished between security needs, or security goals, and status goals. So we can actually distinguish between, let's distinguish between status goals and growth goals. So status goals tend to be things that are more tied to security as well as ego. And those things just don't tend to lead to long-term fulfillment. We tend to know the kinds of goals that do lead to long-term fulfillment, and we have hundreds and hundreds of studies showing this to be the case. So you're probabilistically going to be good if you choose some of these. If you focus on the growth goals, there are things like contribution to society, mastery of a skill, things that relate to connections, things that relate to meaningfulness, things that will add deeper meaning into our lives. And there's lots of different paths to meaning that we can have among humans. So when you're trying to decide what are my potentialities, well, think about which potentialities, if I realized it, would lead to growth, and which ones would take me into our deficiency realm. And Carl Rogers actually believed that we have built in a chip called the organismic valuing system. And I know it was kind of interesting the way he framed that, but alternatively, he sometimes referred to it as the self-actualizing tendency. Let's go with that. I think that's better than the OVM. I was actually going to call that section of my book, "Are you down with the OVM?" Whatever. But okay. But anyway,
I think you named it a better title.
Yeah. So self-actualizing tendency, we have it within us, and we actually, if we can really listen to the deep recesses of ourselves through meditation and deep insight, we know it's there. We know, and Maslow said this too, we know deep down when we've been a bastard. Look, we may deceive ourselves, and
I don't
have
know
all
if
sorts
people
of,
know. Like when people are bastards to me, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong about it, but maybe they don't realize it.
Oh no. Yeah, maybe they're not aware of it. That's why I said the mindfulness aspect, but I think they have the potential to be aware of it. I think it exists, that module. I don't think people get in touch with it, though, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm suggesting that we get in touch with it, deeply get in touch with it. Now, I've gotten to a point in my life where even if I don't make the growth choice, I'm pretty good at knowing now that I didn't make the growth choice. Sometimes I'll consciously not make the growth choice. I have dark side Sundays where I order takeout pizza, watch Netflix all day, don't get out of my bed. I say, look, I'm going to have a dark side day, because that's part of just being balanced. Do you know what I mean? But do you see my point?
Yeah, yeah.
I know it. I mindfully made the choice.
And I guess look, when you're and you have this principle, one of the principles you have here is create the best version of yourself. And the best version of yourself doesn't mean you're going to be the best all the time. It means you're going to be aware of, when you're perhaps acting on purpose suboptimally, but you do your best with it.
That's exactly right. And Maslow was very clear that self-actualizing people weren't perfect. They took out the trash just like the rest. I don't know. Well, that is not an example of not being imperfect, but they I don't know. They would get a temper like the rest of us. It's not like they were these, just celestial beings, angels. In fact, and this is kind of cool. I've really looked into this because I was like, does there actually exist any purely moral people in this world? Is that a thing? And there has been studies done on this that show that doesn't there's no one who, if you track them throughout the course of their day, they're like at 100% in making moral decisions all the time. Like human personality is just density distributions. What that means is that all of us go dip between the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on that scale throughout the day. It's just that there are some human beings that, in terms of frequencies and frequency distribution, they're much more on the 4s and 5s in terms of their distribution. But it doesn't mean that they don't have the 1s and 2s. Did that make sense at all?
Yeah. And I think, and I'm kind of going down the different principles because they're all sort of connected with each other. I mean, they're all really saying the same thing, but it's different ways to. I think each one of these principles people should look at and see which ones resonate with them, because those are the ones probably that they could relate to and focus on and improve. So I like this principle number 6, which I think is a good guidepost. Strive for growth, not happiness. So if you're going to make an action where, and you think to yourself, I want to do this because it'll make me happy, you should probably at least take a step back and say, well, okay, but will this be a growth decision? So, because that could be a much more important way of determining if you should do an action.
Yeah, that's great. Some things that may bring us happiness in the moment are detrimental to longer term growth.
Yeah, and so I guess just what do you do? Like, do you ask, like, when's a situation where you've chosen growth over happiness?
Well, I'm gonna be just honest. Okay. So sometimes I get emails from just really annoying people who they're like, "Hey, would you read my entire dissertation for me, and comment on it? And by the way, it's due tomorrow." And I'm not. And keep in mind, I'm not their advisor. I've never talked to them before. Do you know what I mean? This is the kind of request I get.
Yeah.
Now, it would actually make me happy to respond with a big F you. And like who do you think you are? But I realize, and it's almost been a universal principle with me, when I've overridden that and chosen, I'm like, I'm going to just choose growth in this moment and respond with kindness, and even saying no, but with kindness, as opposed to what would actually bring me happiness in that moment, or I should say some sense of like primal satisfaction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have found it often leads to unexpectedly positive things that I never could have predicted.
It's almost like George Costanza in Seinfeld doing the opposite of what he wants to do all day long.
Yeah.
And
I love it.
And his life gets great after that.
Yeah. So oh my God, we should actually end on that note, because that's like the ultimate example is a George Costanza reference.
Well, okay. I do want to say, though, this is a great book. Like, just reading it put a lot of things in my mind of things that I could do better in my own life. And a lot of it, too, was a reminder of, it's like you say, people, we're all just trying. And so, like, I've written some versions of some of these ideas. I remember once I wrote an article about every decision's a fear decision or a growth decision, which is kind of similar to your deficiency versus growth. But you often, in times of crisis, we often forget these high-minded things and ideas that we have at better points in our lives. And so this book was not only a good reminder, but a good kind of roadmap of how to achieve, or how to not achieve, but go in the direction of being a better person, being and by better person, like you said, doesn't necessarily mean a happier person, but a person just self-aware of the things that are holding me back or hurting myself or hurting others or preventing me from love or success or other things that could be good in my life.
Thanks, James. You're a really great friend and interviewer. This was a lot of fun for me to be able to really do this. Yeah.
I didn't though. Here's where I failed as an interviewer though. You mentioned pretty early on that you needed this heavy blanket because of it's said to cure autism and schizophrenia and things like that. Are you schizophrenic?
Oh no, and I'm also not. I'm not very high in the autism spectrum either. But I was being a bit cheeky because I wanted to point to the absurdity of something claiming that it would cure every ailment known to humankind. And by the way, I don't view autism as an ailment, or even really schizophrenia. I think all these things in context. That actually was my latest article at Scientific American, was on how autism can be viewed in a positive lens. So yeah, I just want to be clear. I was just, in a comedic sort of way, as a way that I thought you'd appreciate, kind of pointed to the absurdity of saying that this blanket is going to cure all these things,
right.
And yet it caused me nothing but severe panic.
So on that note, Scott Barry Kaufman, the author of Transcend. Wait, let me see the subtitle. What's the subtitle? I don't know if I have the subtitle in the PDF. I don't think I have a title page. Is there a subtitle to this?
Oh yeah, the new science of
yes.
self-actualization.
Yeah, Transcend, the new science of self-actualization. Scott Barry Kaufman. It's basically a reformulation of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I hope I really hope a book like this kind of adds to the ongoing 50 or 60 or 70-year discussion of what Maslow was doing, and you weave together so many different theories of psychology. And I didn't know Maslow worked with Alfred Adler, who had worked with Freud. Like, there's a whole historical context and story of how psychology evolved into ultimately focusing on what you call transcendence, these ideas of personal growth that are beyond, the normal achievement-oriented psychology that we often, or self-psychology that we often live by. So I think this is a very important book. I encourage everyone to read it, and even worst case, skip to the exercises and the challenges in the back. Like, it's great. But I do encourage reading the whole thing to get an understanding of the context. But these exercises are great. The challenges are great. The whole book's well written. Thanks, Scott, for coming on the podcast, and definitely come back on again. There's more things I want to talk about. So, but
absolutely.
But we'll have you on when this crisis settles down and you're back in New York. And good luck over the next few weeks.